let's go into the sort of Christian tradition of thinking about equality. And it's interesting. Yes, Aaron.
The indigenous.
I'm going to talk about that. Yeah. So, remarkably, some political philosophers are now recognising the necessity of giving a theological account of equality. The English economist R.H. Tawney put it as nakedly as this. I've got this quotation there. In order to believe in human equality, he said, it is necessary to believe in God. In order to believe in human equality, it is necessary to believe in God. Friedrich Nietzsche, who loathed the idea, blamed it on Christianity. It was one of Christianity's pieces of slave mentality. So this was, clearly to him an idea that degraded the human spirit and stopped us being super individuals, supermen, usually men for Nietzsche, and Christianity was responsible for it. In the 17th century, the great John Locke, considered the founding father of political equality, explicitly anchored his account of equality in a thorough exegesis of the scriptures, something conveniently overlooked by equality's secular adherents today. So John Locke's a great hero for many political philosophers today. But in his works, he often had page after page of scriptural exegesis. But of course, those bits are cut out from political reading courses today because for most people they're unintelligible or very dull. But yet you can't really read Locke properly without reading him as a theological thinker. The equality that our neighbours consider so self-evident is in fact rooted in the biblical revelation. So then what account does the Bible give of human equality? The great command of God to humankind after love of God is to love your neighbour as yourself. In regard of the needs of your neighbour, think as you would about yourself and your own needs. See your own reflection in the face of the neighbour. Regard your neighbour as your equal because he or she has been given existence on the same term as I have been given existence. But who is my neighbour? Well, what did Jesus do in response to that question? He told the story of the Good Samaritan, as you know, the aptly named Good Samaritan. The Samaritan is good because he has no regard for the national, racial and cultural divisions that would normally separate human beings, potential neighbours, from one another. In fact, he is an illustration meant to shame Jesus' Jewish listeners. The Samaritan at least realises that the God who created all is the God of all. What the Samaritan did right was in seeing himself in the stricken man enough that he could love him. When you love God with all your heart and all your strength and all your mind, you love him as the maker of all. And it will lead to discovering as neighbours even those who are beyond the boundaries of the chosen people. It is the Samaritan who truly obeys the ancient law, and ironically, this outsider can call himself truly a member of the people of God. As the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote, the neighbour is the absolutely true expression for human equality. In case everyone were in truth to love his neighbour as himself, complete human equality would be attained. Everyone who loves his neighbour in truth expresses unconditionally human equality. So he's saying that exactly, I think, rooted in Jesus' story, human equality actually derives from love of neighbour as oneself. That this command comes from the God who requires wholehearted love of himself is a remarkable affirmation from him of the worth and dignity of all human beings. The original condition of humankind, as described in Genesis 1, was of profound equality. The stamping of all human beings with the image of God, male and female, so God created man in his own image, which is a sort of gender-neutral term, or a whole term. Then it says male and female, he created them in God's image, in other words, image and likeness, is immediately a signal that human beings are ordered to one another from a basic equality in relationship to God. We are all in God's image, and so we are all in the same relationship to God as each other, as one another. We're in the same situation as children of God. If they are equal, in other words, it is because God sees them as equal. and makes them as equal. Among the animals, Adam can find no suitable companion, no one with whom he can be bound together in loving cooperation. When Eve is made, he instantly recognises her sameness to him. She is, as he says, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Now, when we read this story in our pre-marriage classes, we read the story of Adam and Eve, and of course everyone gets really upset about the word helper and the idea of the rib. But I think in that story is a fundamental sameness between the two of them. Why is Eve made from Adam? Because we know that every man is born of a woman, but we are seeing here that woman and man are of the same stuff. That is an ancient way to think. She is made from him. They are not made of different substances from the sky, one from the sky, one from the soil. She is his helper, as God, that's a word used of God, by the way. God is my helper, says the Bible. So it's not a depiction of inferiority. It's a depiction of co-worker, cooperation and companionship. She is the one with whom the dominion over the animals may be shared and with whom the task of filling the creation may be undertaken. Note how the difference of male and female is not at all a difficulty for Scripture's account of their essential equality and complementarity. However, with the fall, as we read it in Genesis chapter 3, their relationship was soured into domination, inequality, and subordination. Equal relationships are disturbed, as Eve is told her husband will rule over her. Inequality is a punishment. Gender relations are forever imbalanced in this sinister way. Not forever, but for now, imbalanced in this sinister way. And it's the testimony of the Bible that God holds human beings equally accountable to him in his judgment of them. This is a perhaps unpleasant way to think of us as equal. But we are all equal to sit before the judgment seat of God and give account to him for our actions. Even the election of Israel as God's special people didn't undermine this claim. In fact, as they discovered, they had been chosen for the sake of all the nations. Israel's God was, as they testified, the creator God. He was no tribal deity. He was the creator God, and so could not be the God of Jews only, but the God of Gentiles too. A mark of the worth and dignity of each human being is that God asks each to answer for what he or she has done.
I didn't understand that last point when you said about Israel.
Well, when Israel were chosen as the chosen people, it was not because they were superior people to the Gentiles. It was not because they were somehow inherently worth more. Actually, they discovered the opposite. Not the opposite, but in fact, they were just like anyone else. They were given a special role. That was the Jewish mission was to be a light to the nations, so that they were chosen for the sake of the world. Abraham's promises were not just to choose a special people, but to choose a special people through whom all the families of the earth would be blessed. So God is not the God of Jews only, but the God of Gentiles too, it turns out. A mark of the worth and dignity of each human being, then, is that God asks each to answer for what he or she has done. So as illustration of this final judgment, perhaps it was clear that before the law, each Israelite stood equal. You shall not render, this is from Leviticus 19, you shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbour. We might compare this with another ancient text, the Hindu Code of Manu. And I've got that there for you. You can see how inequality is written into this particular text. A Kshatriya, I'm going to mispronounce this, having defamed a Brahmana shall be fined 100 panas, a Vaisya 150 or 200, a Sudra shall suffer corporal punishment. A Brahmana shall be fined 50 panas for defaming a Kshatriya. In the case of a Vaisya, the fine shall be 25 panas. In the case of a Sudra, 12. A once-born man, a Sudra who incites a twice-born man with gross invective, shall have his tongue cut out, for he is of low origin. If he mentions the names and the caste of the twice-born with contempt, an iron nail 10 fingers long shall be thrust red hot into his mouth. It's not the violence that I'm particularly pointing out here, but the inequality of status that is sort of fundamental to that religious perspective. Very different to the perspective of Leviticus. where even the alien within your gates is given the rights of citizenship and protection. Something and should take the Sabbath. So you can't kind of import immigrant labour to work on the Sabbath. By the way, in ancient Israel, you can't do that and say, well, their religious holidays are different. No, they have to observe the Sabbath as well. Something else is announced in the Bible under the category of God's judgment. God will not ignore the ongoing injustice of social inequality, the rapacious greed, the lust for power, the abuse of the poor, the neglect of the widow and the orphan, the abuse of the alien. The prophets in the Old Testament deliver the promise, further expounded by Jesus himself, that God will overturn the power structures of the world. As Mary puts it, the rich will go away empty and the poor will be filled. Luke's Gospel, of course, is replete with tales of how the coming of Jesus Christ restores the long neglected social balance. It's the Gospel that does it, though. The Gospel, that is the power of God for the salvation of all who believe. Justification by faith, which is the message that Luther drew out of the New Testament. It was, of course, it's Paul's message. But it's a message of basic equality. For faith costs nothing and earns you nothing. You are not justified by dint of your birth. There is no birth privilege involved in justification by faith. In the people of God, there is nothing you can boast in except in the grace of God. In the people of God, there is then a spiritual equality that does not expunge social distinctions for now, but relativises them. This is expressed especially symbolically in the Christian church by eating together. Meals were especially significant for the first Christians, as eating together symbolised the relativising of worldly distinctions between believers. By all accounts, the early church was a radically egalitarian